The Edmonton Oilers find themselves even at one game apiece as they head down to South Florida for games 3 and 4. Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers will talk about that crushing double overtime loss and what it'll take to win on the road. That and more next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Oilers and a familiar voice and face to Locked On NHL fans, Nick Zararis. And Nick, what a thrilling game 2 was, and yet it's got to be a little disappointing for the Oilers to fall short in double overtime.
Of course, we were talking about it before we jumped on. It's hard to be mad in a double overtime game that goes as long as that did. You know it's going to be a funky goal. Skinner himself would tell you he probably could have slowed that down and it wouldn't have crossed. But both teams had a number of chances throughout both overtimes. And you get to that point, you know it's going to be something funky or dumb that ultimately wins the game. And it was an untimely Evan Bouchard pinch, which by and large haven't happened in these playoffs. And I know Bouchard's a very lightning rod player when it comes to conversation because he's a little bit unconventional in his toolbox as a defenseman, skews towards offense, doesn't really use his size, even though he's a bigger guy, doesn't skate incredibly well. So he can occasionally get caught in those in-betweens where he has to make a decision, and he took an extra half second to make said decision and allows Marchand to go around him. But the play I come back to and why I feel a lot different about this year's Oilers team than last year's Oilers team is the fact they even got to overtime to begin with. You know, that 3-minute stretch at the end of regulation that culminates in the Perry goal, as good as they were last year, I didn't feel the degree of inevitability that they were going to score there. When you have a 6-man unit, and God bless Perry, who's doing this at his age and making that incredible individual effort as he's falling down, as he's getting his stick jammed, you're getting contributions from everyone. These games, no matter what the score is, you know, game 1, they were down 3-1. They come all the way back to win in overtime. They get out to a nice lead in game 2. They blow the lead. They still tie it and force overtime. They have continuously found ways to get those. And Florida's a good team. You know, Florida is going to have counter punches. And as much as we would like this to be an Oilers in 4 or 5 scenario, it just wasn't very realistic. This Florida team is remarkable. I was reading an article yesterday. They're 24-12 in the playoffs on the road under Paul Maurice, which is kind of insane. They are a truly great team, and the Oilers made just a few mistakes. You know, a Marchand shorthanded goal and the Marchand overtime winner. Those are 2 plays that don't happen all that often. But in a game like this against a great team, it is those 1 or 2 mistakes that are ultimately going to swing the game.
Talk to me a little bit about Stuart Skinner, because, you know, the coach went out of his way to defend him and talk about the effort that he made. Is the criticism of him fair after game 2?
I think anytime you're playing the Panthers, who magically seem to always end up falling on the goalie, no matter where they get bumped, it's really hard for me to be pressed about some of the goals. I think the Marchand goal he probably should have had, but other than that, he also got seriously shaken up on the one play with Bennett early in this game. So I'm inclined to give Stu a little bit of benefit of the doubt. He was great in game 1, especially in that second period when Florida made a really prolonged push. I think a lot of the Oilers conversation around Skinner can largely be tied to something I talk about on Locked On Oilers all the time. If Stuart Skinner just needs to be one of the 19 guys on a given night, most of the time that's good enough. You know, the same way we just said most of the time the Oilers play the way they did in game 2, they're going to win. If Stuart Skinner needs to be the difference between winning and losing for the Oilers, that's where they get into a problematic area, because they're just not built for that. They are not built around Skinner being a game winner by himself. Yes, he had 2 of those games in the series against the Stars, which was entirely out of nowhere. But for the most part, he's going to give you 25 to 30 saves. He's probably going to give up 2 or 3 goals. If you can score 4, which they have in these first 2 games, most of the time you put 4 past Sergei Bobrovsky, that's enough to win. So I'm more inclined to say it's a little bit more on the defense, and particularly the penalty killing, which has still really struggled to get going, even close to what they were last year in these playoffs.
Give me some unsung heroes on the Oilers, besides Corey Perry, who we've been talking about last week and a little bit already this week. Some guys who are a little bit under the radar, but are really helping this team get to where they are right now.
I've loved what I've gotten out of Kapanen and Podkolzin in this series. And the Zach Hyman loss is definitely felt, especially on the power play. But the big thing Hyman was doing in these playoffs, he was leading the playoffs in hits. He was, I think, 18 hits away from the playoff record for hits in a single postseason when he broke his wrist in the Dallas series. And Podkolzin and Kapanen have largely filled that billing. Evander Kane has definitely been inclined to throw his body around. But for guys like Kapanen and Arvidsson, who are only playing 11, 12, 13 minutes a night, if you're going out there every 4th shift for 45 seconds as hard as you can to put pressure on the forecheck, I mean, that's what forces the no-sec delay of game in game 1, is that Podkolzin is bearing down on him, and instead of trying to absorb that hit or get out of the way, he throws the puck out of the rink, delay a game, Oilers come down and score on the power play there. That forecheck has really been integral to their success during prolonged stretches of this series, because Florida doesn't want their defensemen to really make plays on the puck the same way the Oilers do. They want their guys, that first pass as quick as it can be. They love rimming it out. They love using the glass. So the more decisions you force those defenders to make in a vacuum, the more you force a Nate Schmidt or a Kulikov or a Mikula to make a decision actively as opposed to just rimming it along, the more opportunities you have to force them to make mistakes, which we saw more of in game 1 and a little bit less of in game 2.
You mentioned the penalty kill. How can they make it a little bit better? Because it may not be great, but how can they make it good enough?
So the real quandary there is, structurally, everybody cheats to one side because they're doing a three alignment, and then the most outward forward of the penalty killers is trying to pressure the puck and force it the other way. And they've had a lot of success when that's been McDavid or Janmark, and they've had McDavid integrated onto the penalty kill at various points in these playoffs just to kind of give them a different look because it's been so poor. But because everyone is skewing towards one side, that back door is almost always open, and that creates a really good look for that person. So that first penalty killer has to do a better job of forcing that puck to move before the puck holder wants to. That's really been the biggest thing, is once the attacking team gets set up in the offensive zone, the Oilers have had a really hard time of forcing even a difficult pass, let alone a change in possession.
Next 2 games are in South Florida. What is going to be different about being the road team, and what are the keys to winning at least one game down in Florida?
The big thing is you can't hide McDavid from Barkov anymore. I expect that will be the most notable difference for the Oilers in these next 2 games. We do know that because the Oilers have broken up McDavid and Draisaitl for mostly 5-on-5, except for when they are down late in games, that does create a bit of a question as far as, do you want to play Barkov against McDavid or Draisaitl? But that'll be the single biggest difference. And I'll be very curious to see how the Oilers choose to match that energy Florida typically plays with. And look, Florida's a great road team, but Florida in particular, when they get that forecheck going and they really start to bear down on you, it becomes suffocating. And surviving the first 10 minutes of game 3 will go a long way. If they get out of the first period only 1-0 or 0-0, if you're the Oilers, and that would be very out of character based on the way these first 2 games have gone, which have been extremely high scoring. But if you're only within 1 or you're tied after 1 on the road against this Florida team, that's exactly where they need to be, because they've shown the ability to come back from these deficits. Obviously, you don't want always have to come back and win these games, but they have shown the ability to win in a variety of different ways. So get through that first period as clean as you can, and go from there. Florida is a truly great team, but this Oilers team is better than last year's and has every capability of pulling this off. They just got to do it.
All right. It's going to be an exciting series. We know that. Nick, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find you and where they could find the podcast?
So Locked On Oilers is available on all the major podcasting platforms on YouTube. On Twitter and Instagram, my ad is Nick Zararis, Nick Zararis. On TikTok, it's Nick Zararis Sports. Thanks, Gil.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You could track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. I'd still love eating out, but not at the expense of my financial well-being. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you could use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year.